Hey, Maddie, what are we talking about today?
It's a good one today, Michelle. We're talking about advice, the type of advice you'll hear from consultants, parents, high school counselors, the internet, and why it's really bad, mostly. We're going to go into 5 different reasons that you can't trust it and why it's often not that person giving the advice's fault, but this process doesn't allow for it. You ready to listen? Ready to hear?
I'm ready. Let's get to it.
Let's do it. All right, so I have 5 reasons for this, why college advice is terrible. The first is that applying to college means a lot of different things. So I was a upper middle class white kid from Northern California applying to a bunch of schools. I had a 3.8 GPA, 1450-ish SAT. It was 2400 rank at the time, so it was a little different. I played sports. I was a debater. I was the leader of my school's town hall meeting. Like I had a background. Then I did okay, I was looking for advice, and a lot of it didn't make sense to me. Essentially, the problem was that it was like I didn't need essay advice. That was the big thing. It's like I knew how to write fun stuff, or when I did write essay advice, I thought it was terrible because it was not for me. Like I wanted to write funny, wacky things. Then I would what was even more frustrating is I would write my essays and I would bring them to like my counselor or my consultant. And I'd be like, "Is this good? Like I did something weird. I wrote about my cat." And then they'd be like, "Yeah, like anything can work." And they're like, "That's great." And I would get really frustrated because I wasn't looking for like a pat on the back. I wasn't looking for reassurance. I wanted to actually know if this is a good idea or not, and I couldn't find it. So now we jump to today, and essentially you and I work with in theory a pretty standardized type of student. They tend to be high achieving, very good stats, from the continental U.S. Often, honestly, Asian or Indian, quite honestly, like immigrant families, and tend to want to go to either like the most elite schools or kind of a tier below that, like your Cornells, Berkeley's, UCLA's. So like those top, like, I would say like, your tippy top tier and second tier of schools. Um, but even within that pretty specific range of students, there's a lot of variance, and that's what like, I'm sure you found working with these students. Like they're very different people. They have very different interests. They have very different backgrounds. They have very different strengths and weaknesses, and that includes both their actual application qualities, so like the extracurriculars they've done, or like how their classes have gone, and whereas weaknesses like they have different. Some of them haven't. Some of them have a C minus in a certain class. Some of them have a rough home life that they have to deal with, and it leads to a situation where very much part of why we meet with them so much is to really get to understand their circumstances, their pros and their minuses.
Yeah.
And it's through that we're able to come up with a more we usually specialize like what we do for them. And like that's very part of what you get with a one-on-one consultant, like a good one at least, who spends the time, is really getting to figure out the strengths and weaknesses of your application, and then figure out ways to celebrate those strengths and profile them, and also while simultaneously kind of cleaning up and like helping with those. And I think you probably noticed that there are certain students that need your help more than others, right?
That's true.
And it's often the students, like the strengths and weaknesses goes more than just application strength, where there are students that their strength is that they have done a ton of things, that they're very diligent. Their weakness is that they have no idea how to write about it. Like either they're not straight from writers in the first place, or they struggle with topic idea generation. And those are the students that I tend to really work with, like a lot, like connect well with. But then there's stuff they have tons of, like they've done a lot of stuff and they have tons of ideas, too many ideas, and keeping those ideas like in a little baggie is where they falter. And that's why I say like this, like say it and falls through our hands together. But that's often where you come in, where you're able to, like, they don't really need like wacky creative man who's giving them a bunch of ideas. They need someone to help them organize them and put them into like spreadsheets, which I also can't do, which is why I hired you.
Yeah, I've noticed like, yeah, some of them really want to like uphold to a timeline and kind of work through that and have all of their dates and everything set up. So that's not a Maddie thing.
Yes. So this is how varied, and how, to the point where I needed to hire help to like help with a different type of student or to really specialize in it. That is within our extremely kind of almost like sheltered, straightforward path of the student that tends to work with me and us. And the actual college world is so much bigger than that. Like I showed my term, but when you're applying to college, you may be in that subgroup, but if you're listening to a podcast, like welcome, you might be in that group. However, it goes much further than that. I know all the students I tend not to work with. I don't work with international students very much because I don't really know that world very well. I tend not to work with students that just want to go to like a good UC or a California school anymore. I did when I was first starting out. I tend not to work with a student who wants to go to liberal arts colleges, like something smaller. Is looking for someone to give a lot of advice on like what's even out there. That's not my specialty. Um, but all those students very much exist, and I know that, which is why the advice that you'll find can be so difficult because I'm a I'm like an expert. I know a lot of stuff, but I'm also a specialist. And if those types of students come to me, I'm actually not going to be that helpful for them because this process is huge and massive and very complicated in so many different ways. So what kind of it leads to is if you're digging, especially online or even with other people for advice for this process, it's a bit of a scavenger hunt. I know, like I talk about. So it's spoiler, like we know each other because your son applied to college one time. That's all.
Right.
The lore, the deepest lore will continue of how this all came to be. It's very interesting. However, I guess when I met him, basically I would say he was kind of looking at the lower end of that second tier, right?
Hmm.
And his background kind of backed that up. I would say he was good to very good, but not really elite in probably any one field. He had good to elite, good to very good grades, good to very good test scores, good to very good extracurriculars, but was not like an insane like 12 out of 10 gunner.
And I feel like we knew that. Like, you didn't need to break that news to us.
Yeah, and that's something I found to be true over and over again. Like students are not oblivious about like where they stand. I would also add that John has a Hispanic background, and like that was another thing that I picked up very quickly. That's important for this application. So also why I liked you and hired you is you kind of it's obvious that you were interested in this world beforehand, like before you met me,
Hmm.
and you kind of knew the score. Like similarly, yeah, you weren't crazy about things. But how was it trying to get this advice like that actually was tailored to your fairly specific situation, you and your son?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Like you said, there's so much information out there. It's not all good information. You have to really sift through things and have a discerning eye and like weed through the junk to find the high quality info. And yeah, we're looking at different things because, his extracurriculars were in chess, but his major was engineering. And so they kind of align, but he doesn't have like a ton of experience in engineering. And then also his colleges, he was kind of interested in the East Coast, maybe a big city. So yeah, trying to find something that aligns with all of those three and sifting through all the garbage was not easy.
You're totally right. And yes, so much of the time I did with John that all my students was taking the kind of like, yeah, because like like bags up. And some students are more, yes, like how do you make this chess student like a proper engineer for these schools he wants to go to? Like is a big part of my job. You also mentioned a lot of the advice is sifting through. That's because it leads us to number two, which is the person giving advice likely has very different motivations and or doesn't know what they're talking about. And I guess the latter is pretty obvious. That comes to like I say like parents, other students, random people online. There's just a lot of bad information out there. So college admissions is like a black box as part of the problem. That could be like 2.5 or 1.5 is that this process is purposely opaque and doesn't tell you anything that's going on. And that's because these schools don't want you to know what's going on because that kind of ruins their system.
Exactly.
I use lines like if it turns out that Harvard only wants like blue-haired kids like from New Jersey this year, like that's their institutional priorities. Well, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to get a bunch of kids with blue hair applying and be like, haha, I've always had blue hair. This is my dream. And I don't blame these schools for being kind of like coy about it. But that same like black box theory, like it makes it so people don't really know why they got into schools. And uh like you're talking basically my experience was like I was not an admissions officer. I wasn't a reader. I didn't work at a school. Instead, I entered this like process like as a well-meaning writer and had no idea what I was doing. And I basically had to the way I figured all this out was like reverse engineering it, like this black box. And then I tried a bunch of weird things with a bunch of students and recorded results. And I was heavily cognizant of like students that over and underperformed basically based on my expectations on their application and then formatted my overall strategy, which we'll get to next time. It's a tease. Our overall strategy to basically like outliers, like the students that especially way overperformed and underperformed. I stopped doing that stuff, and I eventually ended up with my overall theory strategy. But I don't know how you're was able to do that, like by just without like having dozens of students to feed into like this meat grinder. Like that was my overall takeaway is the way I did it makes sense to me and it is like replicable, I guess, but you don't I did not do it with one student or myself. Like I applied to college myself and was paying attention to that. I did not have an entire system and know how to get someone else in afterwards. And then we get to the second half, which are like high school counselors, admissions reps, and consultants. And I will probably talk more at depth about these three like in a later episode. But we go down the list. Like a high school counselor, their job is not necessarily to get you into every school you want to get into. Their job is to make sure to get you get into a college, but also everyone else in your high school gets into a college. Like that is the metric that they are most concerned with. And yeah, if there's some Stanfords or Harvards or what have you sprinkled in, it looks good. But more so, they simply don't have the time or ability to really be focusing down. So if you ask them, it was a joke. It's like if you ask them a question, if they say like this isn't great, they are then inherently volunteering to work help you with it, and like they're often busy with the other 450 kids. And the cliche is true that like their job is kind of usually help like the bottom 10% get into college in the first place, and that doesn't leave them a lot of ability. So they will often, I think, pass off or give like lousy, just be yourself type advice because it's a lot less work for them if you believe them.
And I think, yeah, like a lot of the high school counselors haven't even met the students until their senior year. So they really don't even
Yeah.
know anything about them.
I doubt anyone listening to this podcast is like, "What? I can't trust my high school counselor." What? Sorry, they don't like me either. It's what as I often say whenever I talk about high school counselors. They don't like me either, so don't worry about it. Admissions reps, schools themselves. So admissions reps you can break into two halves. These are their admissions reps in schools themselves, like from elite schools. We'll get to admissions reps in schools themselves from like any school that you can get into with a 3.8 or GPA or higher. So like right around, I don't know, like 25th on the US News World Report. Their job is to mostly let students in who have that GPA or higher, like their stats. And like a future episode will be showing stats to back up this idea that they don't actually have that many judgment calls to make. Like get good stats, you'll get into those schools. So their advice, like worthless, is mean spirited. However, I don't. It's inherently distrustful because I know the realities of who actually gets into their schools, like on the back end. It's kids who have the stats that are above their averages who don't write about something horrible or stupid, and that's why their advice, even if it's well-meaning, I don't trust it because it does not apply to the top level. Whereas we get to the reps in schools that are very difficult, and it absolutely is. They also have like they're the ones you really want to pay attention to. However, they're just going to lie to you, and it's a combination of again, it's not in their best interest to tell you why you like who doesn't get into their school because that's like kind of company secret. Also, they don't always know as much as you might think because like their job, like they might just be kind of like soldiers, like they're employees, like they don't know what like Mr. Harvard or Mr. Stanford is thinking. But just in general, you just can't trust them, you know. And I have to say like don't trust what admissions reader or officer does says. Trust what they do. Yeah, we'll get that admissions officers is its own episode. And then there's other consultants. Well, often they're trying to sell you something, or they don't really know what they're talking about either. And that's actually very much a goal of this podcast. Is like, hey, this is free. If you think I suck, like turn it off. If you think I'm lying, turn it off. Like I don't know. I'm already booked for this year. Okay. Yeah, it's just the people. Like yeah, the sources for this information is not super trustful, which leads to number three, which is like a very special episode. It's just in quotes. Anything can work. And this was originally the title of this podcast. I was going to rant about this itself. Instead, it's kind of like a mini rant. I find like this quote is a virus that has infested the world of college admissions advice, and it seems to mostly take place whenever anything about essays comes to the front, where it's like, hey, should I write about this? Can I do about this? Can I write about this? And the response is always like, anything can work. But also, no, I don't know if you want to write about like collecting your grandmother's bones. Like, I don't know, like whatever. Sometimes it's after anything can work. They give like decent advice. Like, no, of course, don't write about that. That's a terrible idea. I badly dislike the term anything can work for, I guess, two major reasons. One is that I mentioned before that like my process is feeding students into the machine with the different ideas. And a lot of that has been fueled by me. Basically, a student comes up with an idea, or we have an idea, or a topic, or a theming advice that immediately my brain goes, no, I don't know if that's a great idea because of this, and this reason, right? Like I'm very chronological. But then my version of anything can work comes in, which is Mattie, you can make this work. Like you're the best. You're the best writer on the planet. You're the best. Everyone loves you. You're the best. And then I go like, what's what I'm like, hell yeah, let's tell brother, we do this because and like there's often reasons I want to do it. The student, for this reason it would be a fun idea or this would be interesting, and I'm like gas pedal baby, let's go for it. And then the student tends not to get in or not to get in at the level that I want them to, or they want to, and it's reached the point that I now have a third like voice where it'll happen. It still happens every 2 or 3 times a year where it's like we have an idea and I go no, and then the second's like nah, Mattie, you're like the greatest writer, like you're God's chosen one, and then a third voice comes in. I go nope, nope, no, 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 like, and it's like, and I say like that voice means no. Like when I have the anything can work Mattie voice, no, we're not doing it, and I really do cut it out, and we move on because I have taken it has not worked. So you're like, no, like anything can work. No, because you're talking to a guy who really it like gets the best version of anything. Is like,
Right.
like when I think anything can work, I really do grind to try to make that thing happen, and then it hasn't. So no, factually, anything cannot work. Not the level that you want it to. The other is just the idea yeah, like anything can work. I was thinking about like this podcast, right? Like anything could have worked, Michelle.
True.
We could have just called each other on like cell phones and then put it onto like Spotify. I don't know, like put it onto Podbase or whatever, some crappy site that I listened to in 2008. And like we don't need a like, or I could be like, hey, do I need a producer for this podcast? And someone's like, no, anything can work. You just need to learn how to do.
I'm glad you didn't pick option one.
I'm glad I didn't do option one because that wouldn't have worked. Like, it's a virus because anything can work only seems to apply to like college essays, and this again goes into like a future just an idea that we like if you're applying to college, you're 17, and if you're applying to especially elite schools, like you have worked very hard to get here, and I find it very upsetting really and very patronizing that we take 17-year-olds who are a year away from being able to go to the military or what have you about that, and this is the most important thing they've ever done probably. They put it all together for them at least, and at the time it is, and they like have it like it's like, hey, should I write about this? And I'm looking at this like, no, it's a bad idea and I know why that is. And then people encourage it with like an anything can work. It's about it's about how you present it, and it's about like how I really despise that concept because this is too important. And the people asking the question, they don't want a pat on the back. They don't want to be made feel okay that like their idea is doable. They want to know what the hell will get them into college and if they should spend all the time and energy doing this topic they've come up with. God, I hate it. It just doesn't apply anywhere else. And like that's what's so strange about it.
Well, and I think it's like when we were reading those essays, what worked to get into Harvard. You didn't necessarily think they would work, but they did. And there's tons of those essays on the internet where kids are searching and they're going to see these and they're going to think, oh, well, it worked for them. Maybe it's going to work for me. And it's deceiving.
Yeah, and I read those at like I think the one I from the last time the one that sticks out to me is the kid who just wrote about how much he loves like academic stuff, and I was like, yeah, that's my version of like anything can work. Is like
Right.
it's so much more cynical. The deeper you've gotten in this industry, it's basically your third year kind of working with me and being like in the game, if you will. Probably the second year like really full time, and you can see like no, it's just not true. Like not any like
Exactly.
how specific and how detailed and how yeah like basically built these applications are that we do make work, that is so the opposite of anything can work. Like I've like the more I've done this job, like no, nothing works. I'm kidding. um and yeah, it just find me examples of this list anywhere. You go to any other internet forum or anything like that where it's like I'm trying to start a podcast or I'm trying to get a job in tech, like job stuff. You know, how would you feel if you're trying to like how my resume look? Can I write this? Like anything can work. It's about that's how you like what the fuck are you talking about? Like it's just like tell me how to get a job. So that's
Yeah.
okay. Four, a little bit less angry, is what does work is constantly changing. So there's a meta to college admissions, as I say, and once upon a time the full meta is both like too long for this and also I'd just be lying. But like the meta was basically until like the year 2000, you just need to have like a 3.9, a 1500. Then it changed because the Common App comes out and the internet changes everything. And suddenly that's not good enough. For a brief period, these schools were like, fine, now you need a 397. We'll just move the bottom up until like we have the students. That didn't work very well. Like that was insane. So now they're like, okay, so what else do we got? It's like, well, we have extracurriculars and essays. And I'm from the 2009 era, which was really like the extracurricular era, I would feel like. And I refer to it as marbles in a bucket and leadership, where the way you got into Harvard in 2009 is you needed the stats, you needed the grades and the SATs, but then you also needed to have the most things. You needed to lead the most clubs and the most
Right.
sports and the most activities and on, and have the longest list of stuff you did and led. And that really was the game. I'm not saying that was wrong. And I played that game and played it pretty well, quite honestly. My problem was my stats weren't good enough. That's why I didn't get into like the tippy
Mm.
top schools. But I played that. That was the game that as it was taught, and I played it to the best of my ability. And that's it. And my application today, what I did wouldn't be as good because it's not themed correctly. Like as we moved
Right.
along, I mentioned my background is like I was well rounded, you know, in a way that made sense then. Um, that's what I think that's one of the biggest problems of honestly probably of advice and internet advice, where it's a combination of like I got hustled. There's an article, God, it's probably like it's about being spiky, and it's a very famous
Hmm.
article. I should have found it, but link it in the notes, where it's like you gotta have a spike, like it's spike theorem.
Yeah.
And I read that article in 2019 when I was starting out. I was like, great, this makes perfect sense, and it did not work. Like it was a mistake, and it wasn't because that article was wrong. It was because it was written in 2012, and it was basically
Interesting.
the information within it no longer really applied. And as I joked, because around 2015, these schools kind of caught on that every kid who was writing about how much he loves French literature. Well, a like that was they got caught, but also I think what really happened is Frenchie came to Stanford and asked where the computer lab was. And that happened a few too many times, and these schools were like, all right, so maybe if you look like this, we're not letting in. But in 2015, I do believe, if you know, listening at home, know what spiky means. Like in 2015, I do believe that was the process. Like we want a group of specialists to make up our well-rounded class. You know, and you may have heard that concept.
Right.
I do believe like until like 2015, 2016, 2017, like that actually literally was their path. But these schools they changed the decks due to like the change of times, because times change. Like we had COVID, we have the Supreme Court decision. There are reasons these schools change their priorities. And it's they're I'm not going to call them glacial. It's slow. They don't like rapidly change things, and like a lot of the core stuff remains the same. But what they're really looking for in their rubric, essentially, that these admissions readers who are kind of just like reading off from paper, like that does change. And that's a big reason you can't trust a lot of the advice, because either like the actual source of the information is outdated, even if it's good, or the person giving the advice is giving outdated information. And I think that this I see all the time when it comes to like what parents think is a good idea. Um, it's not like it's a lot of stuff that like makes sense from when they heard about it like 6 years ago, or from when someone else's kid got in, like that cliche that falls apart when it's actually 6 years later, and it's like what is different.
Yeah, it's like a pinned Reddit post from like 8 years ago or something.
Yeah, and like this one isn't really anyone's fault, I guess. Like, but this is just a good example of why like this advice is so frustrating. And similarly, like it goes back to why the people giving it. You get former admissions officers, readers. There's a reason I always go ostracize readers. That is absolutely its own episode. I was going to call them readers from now on, because most of them are readers, and you know what I'm talking about if you're one of them. But yeah, it's like even their advice. Like if they worked there a decade ago, well, I mean, sometimes these people kind of got each other's cell phone numbers and they can chat and they may understand the basics of it, but just because someone has memorized the rubric or something 10 years ago, some massive corporation, it doesn't mean that they really know what it is now. Like just think about any company or any big process in a decade, how different their priorities will be.
Right.
And yeah, like I think this one it's a little bit quieter and like in the background, but it's something I notice over and over again of why something doesn't seem quite right. Like often it's like, no, this guy's just an idiot, or like this device is just lousy. But like a lot of times is, yeah, this made more sense in 2008 when they heard about it. Like it's just the game has changed. And then that leads us to our final point, and this one's more general. Is like this is hard. It is hard getting into schools, especially the most elite schools in America. I will note here that goes back to number one. Like it is a lot harder to get into the most elite schools in America than it is to get into UC Davis or San Diego State or there's the difficulty of college admissions does not go like I can't see my camera. It does not go like this. That worked, Michelle? I'm only looking at you.
Yeah.
It goes like sorry, Charlene. It goes like this. It is
Yep.
an exponential curve, and I don't know if anyone knows it. Like it's actually pretty reasonably easy to get into most schools if you have the GPA and stats they are looking for, and that will be a future episode. However, once you get into that like top 20 schools, like it really escalates very quickly. You get into that top 10 schools, and it's unfathomably difficult. And I know this because I've dedicated my life, like this job, this career, like is my life passion, to beating these top schools. And I really say beating because I'm a weirdo. Like I'm fascinated by this process. I'm getting everything and I have a natural skill set and the ability to give my very best to it. Like I am a professional writer. I am a weirdo strategist guy. Strategist? I don't know. I'm trying. I have 2 minutes left. 2 minutes left. 1 minute left. Pick color. I basically live, breathe, and sleep this world and have built an entire system that I'll get into next week again. That's the big tease. Actually, 2 weeks from now, because next week's your episode. But I basically live, breathe, sleep this world and still mostly take L's at the top universities in America with my strategies. I'm still trying to refine them and still trying to figure them out. And I guess that leads to like your perspective. You entered this a few years ago. I already had this crazy Willy Wonka factory that I want to show you all this stuff of. But again, why I like working with you and why I want to sign you is you did enter this world with quite a bit of knowledge base, like on your own hand. You were the well-informed parent, and I'm sure that is. Hey, and my cat's here. Hey.
Aw, hi, Kitty.
Yeah. Hey, Kitty. Her name's Penny.
Penny.
I'm sure that is another group that will be listening to this, is like the well-informed parent who wants to know more.
Yeah.
And how do things change when you go from well-informed parent process to like on the inside and like getting to really see just the nitty-gritty of how this process comes together?
Ooh, that's tough. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with learning about the students, because obviously with Jonathan, I already know everything about him. I know all of his extracurriculars. I know his strengths and weaknesses. But to, elevate a college application or put something together that's successful is like trying to learn their strengths and weaknesses, which you kind of already talked about too. Like that's hard. You have to get to know the student. You have to understand that. And their extracurriculars too. Because a lot of times I'll ask a student, what have you done? Okay, president of the chess club. Well, what did you do in the chess club? And then it's like pulling that information out can be really difficult. So pro tip to parents and students, starting in middle school, keep a spreadsheet of the extracurriculars, the events, the awards, and accomplishments. You do not want to come to senior year and then have to try to put all of that together. If you keep the spreadsheet, for 4 or 5 years, you're going to be ahead of the game. Like, I wish every single person would have that.
The fact that is like so not the advice I would ever give to parents. I was like, yeah, spreadsheet. That's exactly what I was gonna say. Is you need a spreadsheet about it. But I like to think that, well, we have a lot more episodes to come. We're just getting started on this, and I like to think a combination of us talking about like we'll be going in depth on all these different factors about spreadsheets and essays and everything like that. And what's exciting will be a combination of. Well, probably going to showcase how complicated this world is by just how much content there is. Like I have zero doubt or fear we can fill like a year's worth of shows about talking about college stuff because it's so complicated and crazy. Yeah. But also in doing so, I think we'll get to showcase just the nuance of how complicated this is, where it's impossible to have like a single TikTok or to just write like a page to cover all of this. Instead, it is, well, like keep listening, it's like every single aspect broken down, and you'll get to see just like how insane this machine is. It's hard, but it's fun. Like, I don't know. I like it. Like,
it's fun.
It's fun.
It is hard.
So that's right, kids. Remember to get your spreadsheets going.
Seriously. Listen to me, okay?
I hired you for a reason. Okay. Thank you, Michelle. We'll be back next time with, I believe it's your turn. We're going to talk about AI in programming, right? AI in college admissions?
Yes. Is it a tool or is it cheating?
Well, I look forward to that.
You're going to tell us. Yeah.
We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching College with Mattie. For more information or a coaching session with Mattie, visit collegewithmattie.com. You can follow College with Mattie on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Tune in next week for more episodes, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.